She was not born in silence. She was born in the crackling tension of an age when African kingdoms felt the earth shifting beneath their feet. In the humid savannas and thick forests of Central Africa, word traveled not by paper or telegraph, but by drums, by travelers, by whispers carried through marketplaces and royal courts. And in those whispers, a storm was gathering, one shaped by foreign sails on the horizon and chains smuggled beneath the promises of trade. Yet somewhere inside this rising storm, a single voice would grow strong enough to challenge an empire. This is her story, the story of the woman who refused to kneel. Her name was Nzinga. Before she became queen, before she rode at the front of armies, before her strategies outmaneuvered governors an ocean away, she was a child, shaped by a world in turmoil. Her earliest memories were of her father's court, a place where warm breezes drifted through carved archways, where the smell of burning resin mixed with the sound of royal counselors debating the fate of the Ndongo kingdom. She learned early that power was never stable, that alliances were fragile, that strength could vanish in a moment. Her father, King Colombo, ruled firmly but cautiously, for he sensed the tremors approaching from Portuguese settlements along the coast. They arrived with the language of friendship and commerce, yet their caravels carried far more ambition than honesty. Nzinga grew up watching envoys arrive with gifts and leave with prisoners. She listened to reports of villages raided at night, people dragged from their homes and marched to the coast to be sold in Luanda. But she also saw her father resist, not always by war, sometimes by diplomacy. She learned that resistance is not always a sword raised to the sky. Sometimes it is a word spoken at the right moment, a silence held longer than expected, a steady gaze that refuses to break. Even as a girl, she studied the world with intensity. The court scribes taught her to read. Warriors taught her to throw spears and ride horses. Elder women taught her the ceremonies that held the kingdom together. And from her father, she learned the most crucial lesson of all, that a ruler's first duty is not to themselves, but to the dignity of their people. This lesson would become the fire at the center of her life. When her father died, the kingdom he left behind was fraying. Nzinga's brother Mbandi inherited the throne, but not the stability that once held their world in balance. Portuguese influence had risen sharply, feeding off the hunger of slave traders and the ambitions of colonial governors. Entire regions were destabilized, villages destroyed, families divided. Every loss was a blow to the pride of the kingdom. Amid this chaos, Nzinga stepped forward not as a warrior, but as a diplomat. When envoys from Ndongo were summoned to negotiate peace with the Portuguese, Mbandi made a decision that shaped history. He sent his sister. Perhaps he knew she possessed a mind sharper than most generals. Perhaps he hoped she would achieve what he could not. Or perhaps, deep down, he feared that she might outshine him. But history does not record his reasons, it only records the result. The meeting in Luanda remains one of the most iconic diplomatic moments in African history. When Nzinga entered the governor's hall, a hall designed to intimidate, constructed to remind Africans of their place, she found only one chair, a deliberate insult. But Nzinga saw through the trap. With calm precision, she signaled one of her attendants, who dropped to hands and knees. Without hesitation, Nzinga sat upon the human throne and faced the governor eye to eye. She showed them that she could not be belittled, not even by an empire. Her presence alone bent the atmosphere of the room. Her negotiations were equally bold. She secured peace, stopped Portuguese raids temporarily, and even arranged for the release of enslaved people. For a moment, it seemed the tide had shifted. Even the Portuguese were impressed. Some whispered she was the finest negotiator they had ever encountered. But if diplomacy could win battles, it could not erase greed nor change the ambitions of those who profited from human suffering. The promises made to her in that hall were broken almost as soon as the ink dried. When Nzinga returned to her homeland, she found a kingdom slipping further into chaos. Her brother's leadership faltered, his paranoia grew, and conflict erupted from within. When he died, under circumstances clouded by rumor, distress, and political intrigue, Nzinga stepped into a role many had never imagined for a woman in that era. She became queen. Her coronation was not a ceremonial luxury. It was a declaration of survival. Surrounded by threats on every side, Nzinga made a decision that defined her rule. She would resist, not as a passive ruler clinging to tradition, but as a visionary willing to reshape her kingdom. She allied with neighboring peoples, strengthened her military, reorganized her army to include those who had escaped Portuguese bondage, and established Matamba as a fortified, politically agile kingdom capable of defying European pressure. She turned her new capital into a haven, a place where runaway slaves could find protection, where women could hold military ranks, where alliances were forged with careful intention. She ruled not from a distant throne, but with her feet planted firmly on the soil of her people. She marched with soldiers through tangled forests, waded through rivers swollen with rain, and slept in camps where danger lurked just beyond the firelight. Even the Portuguese began to reconsider her. They had expected her to fade, to surrender, to collapse under the sheer weight of their expanding empire. Instead, she became more elusive, more strategic, and more determined with each passing year. Her campaigns frustrated generals who believed themselves naturally superior. Her tactics were unpredictable. Ambushes, shifting alliances, surprise raids, negotiated pauses followed by swift counterattacks. She learned their strategies, then engineered ways to dismantle them. Still, her resistance was not merely military. She understood the power of symbols, the power of ceremony, the power of hope. When she rode into camp wearing red, her soldiers saw not just a queen, but a living banner of resistance. They followed her because she fought for them, because she believed in them, because she refused to allow foreign forces to define the destiny of her people. The years flowed onward, and Nzinga's legend grew. She outlived the Portuguese governors who tried to defeat her. She outlasted alliances that sought to weaken her. She guided her kingdom through political storms, famines, betrayals, and shifting regional power struggles. Even in her later years, when age slowed her stride but not her spirit, she negotiated new treaties on terms far more favorable than those her enemies had expected. By the time Nzinga reached her final chapter, she had spent decades fighting for sovereignty, decades shaping a political landscape that might one day shield her people from the full weight of colonization. Her final years were marked not by battle, but by consolidation, stabilizing Matamba, ensuring a peaceful succession, and securing a legacy of resistance. When she died, at 81, the news carried through Central Africa not as a whisper, but as a wave. Elders spoke of her as the shield of the kingdom. Women remembered her strength. Soldiers remembered her courage. And even her enemies acknowledged her intelligence, her resilience, and her unmatched will. But perhaps the true measure of her legacy lies not in the battles she won or the treaties she signed. It lies in the fact that she never allowed her people to be erased. She refused to become a footnote in the story of empire. Instead, she forced the world to confront her, a queen who outthought, outmaneuvered, and outlived those who sought to dominate her land. Centuries later, her spirit endures. In Angolan songs passed down through generations, in statues that honor her, and in the pride of African history reclaimed, and in every struggle for freedom, every movement that rises in defiance against oppression, there is an echo of a woman who once sat tall above a human throne and showed an empire that dignity is not theirs to give or take. Her story reminds us that resistance does not always win quickly. Sometimes it takes a lifetime. Sometimes it takes generations. But courage, once ignited, can outlive empires. And so, as the sun sets over the plains where she once rode, as the forests whisper the memory of her footsteps, we remember the truth she proved, that even in the darkest moments of history, a single determined voice can rise, can challenge, can overcome. She was Queen Nzinga, the woman who defied an empire, the strategist who turned the forest into a fortress, the diplomat who made governors tremble, the ruler who stood tall long after those who opposed her had turned to dust. Her legacy shines not as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for all who believe that freedom is worth fighting for. And long after the chains of empire have wrested away, her name still stands, fierce, unbroken, unforgettable.